Hello everyone, welcome to the Canada Truth Channel where Canada, the illusion of freedom and system of control is exposed. Today, once again, we are exposing the greatest fraud in the history of Canada. Let's get started. Here we are on the Parliament of Canada website, and we're going to have a brief overview of the Canadian parliamentary system. Canada is a constitutional monarchy and a parliamentary democracy founded on the rule of law and respect for rights and freedoms. The government acts in the name of the Crown but derives its authority from the Canadian people. Please, ladies and gentlemen, keep that in mind. Canada's parliamentary system stems from the British or Westminster tradition. Parliament consists of the Crown, the Senate, and the House of Commons, and laws are enacted once they are agreed to by all three parts. Since Canada is a federal state, responsibility for lawmaking is shared among one federal, 10 provincial, and 3 territorial governments. The judiciary is responsible for the interpretation and application of the law and the Constitution and for giving impartial judgments. The Canadian Constitution. Canada's Constitution sets forth the system of fundamental laws and principles that outline the nature, functions, and limits of Canada's system of government, both federal and provincial. It prescribes which powers, legislative, executive, and judicial, may be exercised by which level of government and sets limits on those powers. It also lays out the powers and authorities of the office of the Governor-General, as well as those of the Senate and the House of Commons. The Constitution involves more than one single document. The Constitution Act, 1867, brought Canada into being with a constitution similar in principle to that of the United Kingdom. The Constitution Act 1982 contains the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the procedure for amending the Constitution. Some of Canada's most important rules are not matters of law, but are conventions or practices. So here we have the hierarchy in Canada. We have the Crown, the head of state, represented in Canada by the Governor-General. Then we have the executive branch, which includes the Prime Minister and Cabinet. And then we have the legislative branch, the Parliament, which consists of the Senate and the House of Commons. The Crown and the Governor-General. In Canada, executive authority is formally vested in the Crown, the sovereign, and is exercised in its name by the Governor-General, acting on the advice of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. The Constitution reserves certain prerogatives of government for the Crown, including powers to. We're not going to go through all of this for the sake of time. So, here we have the Constitution Act 1867. Pierre Elliott Trudeau and Queen Elizabeth II changed the name from the British North America Act 1867 to the Constitution Act 1867 through the Canada Act scheme in 1982. Now, as I've said in many videos before, it's very, very important when you're reading any acts, statutes, regulations, or codes to understand the definitions used in that particular act, statute, regulation, or code, because legalese is not English. Legalese changes the definitions of words from common usage, which you and I understand, to legal definitions. So it's very important when we're reading through these acts and statutes, number one, that we read the definitions, and number two, that we also read the endnotes. So for those of you that are familiar with the construction of acts and statutes, you'll notice something very important is missing from the Constitution Act 1867. Moving right along, we're going to take a look at the endnotes. Now, right here we have our first endnote, and we'll just pop that endnote open. And here we see the enacting clause was repealed by the Statute Law Revision Act 1893. It read as follows: "Be it therefore enacted and declared by the Queen's most excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Lords Spiritual and Temporal and Commons, in this present Parliament assembled, and by the authority of the same as follows." We will get to definitions in a minute, but we can clearly see the enacting clause was repealed in 1893. Going back to the document itself, let's look at endnote number 2. Endnote number 2, as amended by the Constitution Act 1982, which came into force on April 17th, 1982, the section originally read as follows: "This act may be cited as the British North America Act 1867. Now, as I've stated before, changing the definition from the British North America Act 1867 to the Constitution Act 1867 does not make it a constitution. Back to our document. We see endnote number 3, section 2, repealed. Let's see what that says. Section 2, repealed by the Statute Law Revision Act 1893, read as follows: "The provisions of this act referring to Her Majesty the Queen extend also to the heirs and successors of Her Majesty, Kings and Queens of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland." Repealed in 1893. So everything in the Constitution Act 1867 referring to the Queen no longer extended to her heirs and successors. Now, if we jump down to executive power, declaration of executive power in the Queen. The executive government and authority of and over Canada is hereby declared to continue and be vested in the Queen. Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria died in 1901, and as we can clearly see, Section 2 extending Queen Victoria's executive government and authority of and over Canada no longer extended to her heirs and successors. So, what does it mean to repeal the enacting clause? Here we are, the legislative process, structure of bills. The enacting clause is an essential part of the bill. It states the authority under which it is enacted and consists of a brief paragraph following the long title and preceding the provisions of the bill. Her Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate and House of Commons of Canada, enacts as follows. Where there is a preamble, the enacting clause follows it. Once again, we see an endnote. So let's pop open that endnote, and it says Interpretation Act. In Canada, the highest legal definition of a word is found in the Interpretation Act if it is not expressly declared in the Act or statute itself. Now, there's something very important that stems way, way, way back in law. It's a maxim of law, and it's very important. Expressio unis est exclusio ulterius. Latin is so cool. A maxim of statutory interpretation, meaning that the expression of one thing is the exclusion of another. And if we look at more definitions, Black's Law Dictionary is a Latin phrase that means express mention of one thing excludes all others. Keep that in mind. Now, we saw our endnote says, see the Interpretation Act. So here we have the Interpretation Act and definitions. Enact includes to issue, make, or establish. And keep in mind our maximum of law, expressio unis est exclusio ulterius. The expression of one excludes all others. So enact includes to issue, make, or establish. Enactment means an act or regulation or any portion of an act or regulation. Moving right along. Enacting Clause of Acts. The enacting clause of an act may be in the following form. Her Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate and House of Commons of Canada, enacts as follows. That was repealed from our foundational document, our Constitution, in 1893. Repeal includes revoke or cancel. And once again, looking at our maxim of law, expressio unis est exclusio ulterius, includes revoke or cancel. The inclusion of one excludes all others. Let's look at another definition. Not that it matters, because once again, the Interpretation Act is the highest legal definition of a word in Canadian law, if it is not otherwise expressed in the particular act, statute, regulation, or code. Now let's look at another definition for repeal. If a government repeals a law, it causes that law to no longer have any legal force. Back to our endnotes, the Enacting Clause was repealed by the Statute Law Revision Act 1893. Section 2, extending Queen Victoria's executive government and authority of and over Canada, no longer extended to her heirs and successors. The executive government and authority of and over Canada is hereby declared to continue and be vested in the Queen, Queen Victoria, who died in 1901. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The greatest fraud in Canadian history. The monarch of Canada, Queen Victoria, died in 1901. and the executive government and authority of and over Canada no longer extended to her heirs and successors after the passing of the Statute Law Revision Act, as well as the Enacting Clause of our constitutional document, our foundational document of Canada. The Enacting Clause was repealed by the Statute Law Revision Act. So Pierre Trudeau and Queen Elizabeth II had no lawful or legal authority to enact the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Constitution Act, the Canada Act 1982 scheme. There you have it. These are not my words. Those of you familiar with the channel know that I don't tell you things, I show you things. These are not my words. This is not conspiracy theory. These are facts in law. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you don't want to subscribe, at least share this important information with every Canadian you know. Our constitutional document, our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, is based on deliberate deception and fraud. Thank you for watching.